Most Americans know that political corruption is destroying the United States, which devotes massive resources to expand and rule its empire. The U.S. Constitution was written to keep some power in the hands of the states, who appointed their U.S. senators, but the 17th Amendment removed this control with direct elections to allow the centralization of power in Washington, D.C. Pundits talk about the danger of a second American Revolution or another Civil War, but few talk about a solution. Some say a third political party is needed, but those are always crushed by legal issues concocted by the two-party overlords. Citizens need something to rally around, and repealing the 17th Amendment is a simple solution that would reduce future depressing tales of the American empire. This amendment was ratified in 1913 and provides for direct election of U.S. senators. This seemed like a good idea at the time, but our U.S. Senate became dysfunctional, as demonstrated in 2023 by 82-year-old Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell.
That's okay. What are your thoughts on running for re-election in 2026?
What are my thoughts about what?
Running for re-election in 2026.
That's
Did you hear the question, Senator? Running for re-election in 2026?
yes.
All right, I'm sorry, you all. We're going to need a minute. Senator Benny.
Yep.
I'm gonna head outside, so come with us. Okay.
Somebody else have a question? Please speak up.
Mitch McConnell is often confused, yet somehow leads Senate Republicans, even though he is clearly unfit. Most Republican voters disapprove of his performance, but he remains since he loyally serves special interest groups in Washington. See Glenn Greenwald's example, linked in the description. In 2023, the United States faced huge problems with mass illegal immigration, rising crime and inflation, homelessness, and failing cities. Yet McConnell said that the priority for most Republican senators was to send money to Ukraine.
Making sure the Defense Department can deal with the major threats coming from Russia and China, providing assistance for the Ukrainians to defeat the Russians. That's the number one priority for the United States right now, according to most Republicans. That's sort of how we see the challenges confronting the country at the moment.
The U.S. Constitution created a federation of states whose legislatures chose 2 U.S. senators to represent them in Washington, D.C. This frustrated wealthy American industrialists who wanted the United States to establish an empire to rule smaller nations for their benefit. They could attempt to influence U.S. senators in Washington, D.C. with dinners, flattery, gifts, and even bribes. But senators knew their votes were closely watched by state legislatures back home who could replace them. The 17th Amendment was mostly a creation of billionaire publisher William Randolph Hearst, whose newspaper empire generated support for the Spanish-American War that added large colonies to the United States. It took years of propaganda until enough senators supported that war. Note that newspapers and magazines were the only source of news for Americans, and newspapers published a morning and evening edition each day. Hearst supported the progressive movement that wanted to improve the nation. They needed to centralize power in Washington, D.C., to pass legislation that was opposed by most states. Hearst operated a near monopoly on the news in the United States and directed his editors to demonize the U.S. Senate and advocate for direct election of senators as a solution. In 1906, his muckraking magazine writer, David Graham Phillips, published a series of articles in the popular Cosmopolitan magazine under the title, The Treason of the Senate. In them, Phillips argued that special interests dominated state legislatures who sent to the Senate people who represented state interests rather than national interests. All other Hearst newspapers printed similar stories. Progressive politicians led by Woodrow Wilson knew that propaganda was far more effective on the public than state legislatures. The 17th Amendment was passed as a reform by well-intentioned people and by corporate titans to centralize power. This quickly allowed major legislation to pass. President Wilson and his progressives passed the Underwood-Simmons Tariff, which substantially lowered duties on imports, and enacted a graduated income tax. They passed the Federal Reserve Act, which established a Federal Reserve Board and 12 regional Federal Reserve banks to supervise the banking system by setting interest rates on loans and controlling the supply of money. The new publicly elected senators did not oppose President Wilson's expansion of the U.S. military and numerous armed interventions. Woodrow Wilson was America's most imperial president. He believed in American superiority and using military force to unite the world under a League of Nations based in New York. From 1913 to 1920, Wilson dispatched American troops to Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Mexico, Cuba, Panama, Honduras, Russia, France, and Turkey. He manipulated the American people into a disastrous intervention in World War I, which prolonged the war, killed millions more, and led to World War II. Americans opposed entry into World War I, but a massive anti-German propaganda effort was secretly funded by the British, who were losing the war, and American arms merchants who were making massive profits. American bankers supported this effort as they had loaned huge sums to the British and French and worried they would default if they lost the war. They promoted half-truths about the sinking of the SS Lusitania and the Zimmerman telegram to gain support for joining the war. Wilson had barely won re-election in 1916 by promising to stay out of the war, but secretly worked to gain congressional support for a declaration of war. See the tale linked in the description. The newly passed 17th Amendment ensured support of the U.S. Senate, whose members were no longer beholden to their state governments, and passed a declaration of war on Germany by a vote of 82-6. Repealing the 17th Amendment would destroy much of the power of corporations and billionaires who quietly control our federal government, no matter who is elected. This is not a radical idea, since President Wilson and his progressives had also passed the 18th Amendment to 1919 that banned the sale of alcohol in the United States, which was repealed by the 21st Amendment in 1933. It would be better to modify the 17th Amendment with a new one to improve the Senate. Before this amendment, it sometimes took state legislatures months to agree on new senators, especially if control was split between political parties. This would be no problem if only the state senates were designated to choose the 2 U.S. senators. They would quickly choose one of their popular colleagues who knew their state issues well. This would end the current practice of multimillionaires and billionaires indirectly buying U.S. Senate seats with massive campaign contributions and advertising campaigns. Recall that in 2000, Hillary Clinton from Arkansas decided to become a U.S. Senator, so moved to New York and won using millions of dollars from her friends outside the state. In many states, most funding for Senate campaigns comes from outside the state. If the state Senate chose U.S. senators, they would choose someone from their state to serve the interest of its residents. A second change to the 17th Amendment would have U.S. senators serve until replaced by their state Senate. They would not hold 6-year terms, but may serve just 30 days or 30 years. U.S. senators will no longer spend hours each day on the phone or meeting with donors and lobbyists. They'll be on the phone with their state senators back home. Should a U.S. senator choose to vote in defiance of the majority of state senators back home, they may be replaced the next day. This will also eliminate the spectacle of sickly or demented senators remaining in office until they are dead, as we saw in 2023 with dying 90-year-old California Senator Dianne Feinstein and frail 82-year-old Mitch McConnell. Senators involved in scandals also stay in office for years until they are convicted of crimes or finish their term. If a U.S. senator becomes mentally unfit or an embarrassment, this change will allow state senators to instantly replace them. After Feinstein died in office, the California Senate was not charged with replacing her because the 17th Amendment gives the governor that choice, who selected a black female lesbian who never held an elected office and didn't live in California. A great advantage of appointed senators is there is no reason to spend many hours each week raising money for their next campaign. The current corrupted system has corporations, billionaires, unions, and lobbyists donating money to senators, which is used for dining and travel and paying friends and family members who work on their campaign. If state senates chose U.S. senators, they will have no need for campaign contributions. Yet the system is so corrupt, senators may claim they need contributions to influence state senators back home with gifts, meals, and donations. It would be best if a provision in the amendment banned any financial contributions to appointed U.S. senators. Another problem in our government is widespread blackmail. Using sexy women or men for sexual tryst is a long-time method. Young people record much of their love life and antics and post it on the internet, which is saved forever and searchable by anyone. We know the NSA records every email, internet post, and phone call in the United States and stores it for access by law enforcement with no warrant or cause. Powerful people from around the world can access this information indirectly to influence senators. Blackmail would become less likely if senators can be immediately removed for voting against their state's interests. Repealing the 17th Amendment is not a new or radical idea. Search the internet to learn that American scholars have advocated this reform. In September 2020, Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska endorsed the repeal of the 17th Amendment in a Wall Street Journal opinion piece. See the article linked in the description. Most senators would never vote in favor of repealing the 17th Amendment, since most would lose their Senate seats, but their support is not needed. Amendments to the United States Constitution have always been first passed by the U.S. Congress, but they may also be proposed if 2/3 of the state legislatures vote for a convention to propose amendments, which become law after ratification by 3/4 of the states. There has never been a federal constitutional convention since the original one, but at the state level, more than 230 constitutional conventions have assembled. If a U.S. president advocated for a convention specifically to repeal the 17th Amendment, nearly all states would approve, since they would reclaim power. On March 2, 2016, the Utah legislature approved Senate Joint Resolution No. 2, asking Congress to offer an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that would repeal the 17th Amendment. One problem with immediate dismissal of senators is that housing costs in Washington, D.C. are high, and apartment leases are usually one-year contracts. Although senators are well paid, it is costly to maintain a resident in Washington, D.C. and back home, so most move to D.C. and just visit their home state. Good people will be reluctant to serve as a senator unless they are wealthy, because they could be recalled just a couple months after appointment. The simple solution is to build a Senate apartment complex near the Senate office buildings with 100 furnished two-bedroom units. Most senators would choose to live there because it's free and very convenient. In addition, safety is a growing problem in D.C., with growing crime, protesters, ambush reporters, and bloggers who harass senators on the street. With the possibility of immediate dismissal, most senators would leave their children back home and spend more time there where they can socialize with state senators. Some may claim that corporations and millionaires will still control the U.S. Senate as they shift efforts to corrupting state senators. This would prove very difficult since there are a total of 1,972 state senators spread among 50 state capitals. This would be a far greater challenge than controlling 100 senators in Washington, D.C., who face elections only every 6 years. Repealing the 17th Amendment is a simple idea that would have an immediate impact on the nation as states regain control of the federal government. U.S. senators would suddenly focus funding on helping people in their state and have little interest in military interventions overseas.